Has One Nation brought the crossbench into disrepute? I just wonder how difficult it might be to recruit people into a crossbench party, given some of the circuses we've seen, and not just with One Nation, but with Palmer and with, to some extent, Xenophon. It hasn't been a good rap for the whole notion of the crossbench, don't you think?
Yeah, you're quite right. It is a concern. It's due to the fact that not Clive Palmer, Pauline, or Nick Xenophon were principle-based parties. They were personality-based parties.
Yes.
The only thing you could say about Nick Xenophon, he's a lovely bloke, as a matter of fact, really, really nice guy. But, you know, when you try to find out what does he believe in, what are his values, he's sort of a fluffy lefty, believes in manufacturing and South Australia. He wouldn't care if the rest of Australia went broke as long as South Australia was okay.
Right.
And so, you know, that gets him a certain way in terms of support, but, you know, it's not particularly good for Australia, and in the long run, not even good for South Australia, quite frankly.
Mm.
And the two guys who've now replaced him, Rex Patrick and Sterling Griff, are also nice fellas, and they're not as left as Nick, but they are still pretty committed to propping up manufacturing, even if it's uncompetitive.
Yeah.
Still very pro-South Australia. So I'm not sure that they'll have any appeal outside South Australia, and I'm not sure how much appeal they'll have without Nick's personality to carry the day in that state. And Clive, of course, there was nothing other than I'm going to stir the buggers up with Clive, and he got a motley bunch of people to join forces with him. They had no common values, no common principles. I made the mistake of thinking that he would be pro-business because he is a businessman, a successful businessman, and approached him on some support on some business issues, and there was no support to be had. He was happy to vote with the Greens and with Labor on a number of issues which are anti-business. Pauline is, well, there are some things you can be clear about with Pauline. She doesn't like foreigners all that much. She's anti-immigration. She certainly doesn't like anyone who's Muslim. After that, it gets a bit fluffy. You don't really know whether she's pro-business or anti-business. On the one hand, she said she supports tax cuts because businesses need lower taxes because they have to employ people. On the other hand, she says no, she can't support them because she doesn't like banks and all that sort of stuff. Penalty rates, she said in the past, she thinks all penalties should go. Then when the Fair Work Commission lowered the penalty rates for hospitality workers, she came out dead against that. So, you know, it's hard to know what the principles behind her that drive her are. You know, some unkind people have said that all three of those parties are just about personalities, they're just about individuals. And, you'd have to say that that's probably a reasonable description of them.
I think so.
And that's probably why they're relatively short-term in their appeal.
Well, see, in your party, there's a common belief in a principle, a range of principles, and the others, it seems like, well, not really I'll have what she's having, but it's a little bit like I believe in what they believe in, which is sometimes difficult to define, as you well set out. Can I ask you about a couple of policy areas like GST and Amazon saying they're no longer going to deliver from their American or UK sites into Australia? Good thing, bad thing, doesn't matter.
No, I have quite a lot of sympathy for Amazon. I mean, the government is trying to turn it into a tax collector. It barely operates in Australia, and what they're saying is, well, we're not going to go to the trouble of collecting tax for the Australian government. It's quite a small amount of tax, really, via our American website. We've got an Australian website, we'll limit collecting the tax to that. The thing that annoys me the most about this GST on low-value imports is that it's really nothing to do with creating a level playing field or raising revenue. It's all about responding to the carping of a couple of local major retailers. Jerry Harvey from Harvey Norman is chief amongst them. They just decided that the reason that they can't compete with lower cost imports is because of GST. It's an absolute load of crap. The reason they can't compete is, well, sometimes their own fault. Sometimes their cost structures are too high, but sometimes also because of government regulations, particularly in relation to industrial relations and wage costs and minimum wages and things like that. But instead of attacking the root cause of their lack of competitiveness, they blame the GST. What gets forgotten all the time is that if you order a $50 book from Amazon in the United States, that might be cheaper than buying the same book here in Australia, but you've also got to pay freight on it to get it out here.
Yeah.
So if, 10% GST is the advantage a foreign company supposedly has compared to an Australian supplier, then it should be absolutely wiped out by the freight cost.
Yeah,
and I don't think the argument stacks up. The budget papers suggest that this GST on low-value imports is only going to raise $16 million over 4 years. $16 million over 4 years. It's ridiculous. It will inevitably cost quite a lot more than that to collect the damn tax.
Yeah.
I don't know what the hell we think we're doing.
Well, people I speak to talk about the range of goods available, and they're not 10% cheaper. They can be 30 or 40 or 50% cheaper in some cases. I'm with you 100%.
If those suppliers who are uncompetitive in Australia really want to do something about that, then they should be looking at the government-caused increases in their costs compared to overseas competitors. Many of their costs are higher, and I feel sorry for them in most cases, but the reason those costs are higher is often due to government regulation and restrictions and so on. If they were constructive about their situation, they would be bitching at the government about those costs, not blaming the lack of a tax on their competitors.
Final issue, back on vaping. You and I have talked about it before, and I know it's probably unkind to say, but it seems to be the addiction to tax collected is much higher up the list of priorities than the health issue around smokers. If it was purely that, then vaping would be, given its introduction in a lot of other countries, be a no-brainer, wouldn't it?
Yes. Well, I initially thought that it was all about the revenue, and, you'd be forgiven for thinking that. The government raises $11 billion a year from tobacco at the moment, and it's going up to $17 billion a year over the term of the forward estimates. But this issue makes me quite cranky, so I actually tackled both the Treasurer and the Finance Minister and said, you guys are sticking with a policy which will kill people. There will be people dying from tobacco smoking who would switch to e-cigarettes if they could because you're too addicted to bloody money. They both vehemently denied that that was the reason for it. Now, I don't think they would lie to me, frankly. I know them both. They're both decent guys, wrong at times, but in fact, wrong quite regularly.
Right.
But, I don't think they're dishonest.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, and if it's not about the revenue, then what we're talking about here is an obsessive health department which has totally captured the minister, Greg Hunt. There are two types of ministers. There are those who are captured by the department and those who have their own mind. I'm afraid Greg has been captured by his department. And that department, that health department, is obsessed with its anti-big tobacco mantra. And they've somehow got it into their heads that e-cigarettes are being promoted by the big tobacco companies, the companies that they absolutely hate to the point of irrationality. Now, the thing is, that's not true. Yes, the big tobacco companies are involved in the e-cigarette market, but, between them, they wouldn't even have 50% of the market. And Philip Morris, which is one of the biggies, has said that its future is not in tobacco. It wants to get out of tobacco completely. And yet here we have the health department so blinded by its hatred of these companies, and there's no denying that in the past they did some bad things.
Yes.
But, you don't get punished forever. You shouldn't be punished forever for these things. No. What they are wanting to do is get out of tobacco, encourage people into alternatives, and the health department is blocking their way, and so is the minister. I'm afraid it's going to take a change of minister with some serious gumption to tell the health department, get over it. We should be concerned about the health of people, not your obsession with tobacco companies. Yeah. People are going to die if they are not allowed to switch to e-cigarettes, and they will die unnecessarily. And that is more important than your obsession with tobacco companies. Yeah,
well said. Now, listen, we started talking about political futures. You're the voice of reason. Don't leave too soon, all right?
All right.
Hang around.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good to talk, David.